I worked with Democrats the best I could to try to get things accomplished. And I always acknowledged that people wouldn't always agree with the things that I would do. But that I hope people at least respected the fact that Frank Ginter was their mayor. So I do take it as a compliment, what he said. Secondly, on earmarks. The country is angry with earmarks because we associate earmarks with things like the bridge to nowhere. And people should be angry, and rightly so. That is part of a much larger problem, however. If you cut spending, you cut earmarks. So you're also not going to hear from me how much pork I brought back for you. When I was mayor, I actually, when the stimulus came out, I opposed it, and I said, we don't want it in Manchester. I said, honestly, whatever needs we have in Manchester, we'll figure out how to pay for it ourselves. I will not be a congressman that looks to have those ribbon cuttings and look at this millions of dollars I brought to you. I will not do that. I don't think that's the role, nor do I think that's what people are asking for. I do think that people want to send someone like me to Washington to cut the spending, to cut the taxes, to cut the debt, to cut the deficit, to make sure that government is focusing on what it's supposed to be focusing on, and to have a pragmatic approach to very complex and complicated legislative matters that are before each and every member of Congress. But I will not be bringing pork back to New Hampshire. That is not who I am. And I firmly believe that we can stand on our own 2 feet. When communities want to get things done, we can be creative, try to figure out how to get those things done in our respective communities. And if it's a community responsibility, then so be it. If it's a state responsibility, so be it. The federal government has specific responsibilities outlined in the Constitution. Those are the things that we should be focusing on as a government. One of them, and I think a very important one, and we haven't talked about it yet, is the defense of our nation. And I don't know how many people heard today, but Ahmadinejad made his announcement that he's got not only 20% enriched uranium, but 80%, which is what you need in order to have a nuclear bomb. That's the time that we're living in. This is, a frightening time. And the UN sort of dismissed his comments. But if you go and look at the timeline of testimony at the defense committees by intelligence agencies in our country, they have been saying since 1990 that this day is coming. And as you look at the testimony that has been made in 92, 94, 96, they're always getting inching closer and closer and closer. Today, he made the announcement that he's got it. Now, I don't think we can believe a word this gentleman says, but I think we have to take that threat seriously. And I get asked a lot about national security. It's a tough subject. I will admit that. But what I tell you is I happen to be the mayor when we lost an officer in the line of duty in Manchester. That was one of the toughest days of my life. It didn't compare to what Officer Briggs's wife, kids, and parents went through. But part of my responsibility as mayor was to keep people safe in Manchester. I think part of the country's responsibility is to keep you safe from people like Ahmadinejad, who, like it or not, wants to annihilate us. When I talked earlier about prioritizing and what my responsibility is as your representative, it's to reform government, reduce your tax burden, protect you, make the very best decision I can make based on the information I have. And what I submit when it comes to prioritizing, any troop that protects us and serves us has to have the equipment and a game plan identified by the general on the ground, not a political decision, but a general on the ground, making that decision on behalf of this nation. So let me take maybe one more question if anybody has it, and then I'll let you all get home. Yes, sir.
I've got a question. Basically, this country really doesn't have a good energy policy, and another thing that I'm worried about, which is going to happen, is our foreign oil could be shut off fairly quickly if something happened over in the Middle East. And I worked at the shipyard for 37 years. I'm fairly familiar with nuclear power. And the nuclear Navy basically started their program under Hyman Rickover, and he had some very strict policies as far as the quality control, the design of a reactor plant, and he had an entire system for the nuclear Navy, which has been in service since the 60s. Basically, the fuel that's spent is taken out at the shipyard is approximately 70% spent, 30% still there. So this fuel is transported to a reprocessing facility where the 30% is extracted. The rest of it is disposed as radioactive waste under controlled conditions. There was a lot of talk at the time about the transportation of the fuel over the railroad. So they developed a container which was tested, and the Department of Mechanics had the test. Basically, it was parked on a railroad track, and it got hit by a locomotive at 80 miles an hour. It was pressurized, and it could not lose 1 pound of pressure past this test. Well, it passed it just fine. So consequently, that spent fuel, which is highly radioactive, has been transported over the rails since the 60s with no problems. In Europe, Germany and France get 75 to 80% of their power from nuclear power. They followed Hyman Rickover's principles. They have a design which is state-of-the-art. They build it under extreme quality control conditions, materials and everything. They transport their fuel, spent fuel, over the rails to a reprocessing plant, and the contaminated portion, the waste, is disposed of properly. In this country, back in the 60s and early 70s, the government, in all their wisdom, decided it was not safe to transport this fuel, spent fuel, over the rails. So in all their wisdom, they built stainless steel tanks, stainless steel and concrete, on site at each reactor plant. The life expectancy of these tanks is 50 years. All spent fuel that comes out of Seabrook is in those tanks. It's not transported anywhere. It's a cumulative effect. It's just growing, growing, growing. While the plant over in Vermont has had fuel put there for 40 years, right on site. No fuel has ever left, no spent fuel.